And with that said, I think we're ready to begin.
All right. Well, thanks, Eric. Thanks, Selma, and thanks so much to Ines and to Michaela and to the staff of the British Cello Society for making this live stream series possible. I'm again going to use my ultra fast New York speech style to cram in as much as we can here. If you miss something, you can always look at the video that Selma will be sending around. Selma, hope you're doing the recording
Yeah.
and the PowerPoint, as well as some other things related to this session. So, this series is exploring the importance of teaching cello students with an organized and sequential system to ensure that the students are learning technique and repertoire in a logical and orderly fashion, and to make sure that we're covering all the important issues for becoming a competent cellist. Thus far, we've looked at the overall philosophy of this sequential approach, and in the last session, we focused on the importance of the first few lessons for establishing basic principles. We also discussed various warm-up exercises and the philosophy of using exercises for teaching various technical issues, for example, extensions or articulation or shifting, etc. And I mentioned many other topics that could be approached in this sequential manner. So today we'll continue our exploration of using exercises to work on technique, and I want to propose a methodology for teaching the details of cello bow technique through the use of the Foyar daily exercises. So for me, the Foyar book is my cello Bible, and it provides the outlines of a syllabus for many aspects of cello bow technique. The Foyar is the quintessence of a sequential approach to teaching and learning. It's organized and presents the technical issues in a logical and stepwise kind of manner. There are 5 pages of bow exercises in the Foyar, numbers 32 to 36, each with a theme and variations. Each variation works on a specific technical issue, everything from basic tone production to bow distribution to dotted rhythms and our all important strokes such as détaché or staccato or spiccato and sautelier, and to string crossings on 2, 3, and 4 strings. So the theme of number 32 is all in first position, and it covers all 4 strings. It's perfect for the student to solidify the basic technical issues such as core sound, détaché strokes, dotted rhythms, bow distribution, and many other fundamentals. Each variation should be polished like a gem and perfected with good sound and a mastery of basic bow technique. Terms should be clearly understood, including the difference between spiccato and staccato, and the importance of a well-executed détaché or legato. The scalar theme of Foyar number 33 adds some complexity by going up to 4th position. This means that the student has to be aware of the contact point going closer to the bridge as the string length is shortened to achieve the same kind of sound as in first position. The variations in number 33 provide opportunities to work on playing with more notes in a bow or sans filet while keeping the sound full and rich throughout the bow and on all the strings. It also builds on various techniques from number 32 as well as issues of coordination and ease of playing. The next 3 pages, Foyar 34 to 36, all deal with string crossings as the main issue. Understanding string crossings is one of the most important subjects for cellists. If players don't use the arm in an ergonomically correct manner, then string crossings in particular can become a major source of tendinitis. Besides understanding how the various joints of the arm move, in other words, the ball and socket versus the hinge joints, the string player must understand that all of the complicated string crossings boil down to 4 basic bowing figures: an arc, a circle, a figure 8, and a wave. So number 34 deals with string crossings on 2 strings. Number 35 works with string crossings on 3 strings, and I also use number 35 and number 36 to explore the use of the twist motion, the pivoting of the body core around the pelvis to assist playing on the upper versus the lower strings. Number 36 involves string crossings on all 4 strings then. I work through these pages with my students very slowly and methodically, week by week. It usually takes about 2 years for a student to go through all the variations, but by the time they finish, they'll have created a bow arm that is effective and organized with a real understanding of how to get a good sound in a relaxed manner and be able to change color, texture, and dynamics as desired. In other words, they'll be able to control the bow, not vice versa. So foyer number 32 works on some of the basic issues regarding the bow arm. We discussed these basic concepts in the previous session, so I won't go into detail again, but I did want to remind you about these principles before starting on the foyer. They include the core sound, the block of sound, the upper arm versus lower arm issues, in other words, the upper part of the arm controlling the lower part of the bow, and the lower part of the arm controlling the upper part of the bow, the elbow going in an arc, the getting into the string exercise to get a good sound when you start, the three principles of tone production, contact point, weight, and speed, and the all-important balance issue, the left-right motion or contrary motion. So if you want a review of these concepts, please take a look at the previous session in this series that's available now on YouTube. After these basic concepts are absorbed, I often start to discuss some of the basic rules for controlling sound. And I usually sum them up in 7 basic rules. Though, of course, I don't present it that way, the way I'm going to do it here. This should be, for the students, a process of self-discovery and experiential learning, where the student figures out these issues and then we create and codify these rules. I'm just going to mention them briefly here, since I know you're all probably familiar with them, even if you haven't expressed them in exactly this way. So the 7 basic rules to control sound are: the higher the string, the lower the contact point. In other words, to get the same sound on the A string as you might get on the C string, you have to have a lower contact point. To get the same degree of intensity when you're playing on a higher string, you need that lower contact, and lower in this case, the way I term it, it means closer to the bridge. Again, having these little mantras can help with remembering how this all works. But of course, one needs to internalize these things so they become second nature. However, the first step is to verbalize them, and these little mantras can help with that. So the higher the string, the lower the contact point. The next one is the shorter the string length, the lower the contact point. In other words, as you play up higher on a string, resulting in a shorter string length, the contact point has to get closer to the bridge to keep the sound consistent. The next one is the more notes in the bow, the lower the contact point. So if you play the beginning of a G scale, say, using full bow and 4 beats per bow, and then you play 2 notes in a bow with the same quarter note, and then 4 notes in a bow, you have to move the contact point lower in order to get the same sound. If you don't do that, the sound will get softer. And the reason is because there's less bow for each note, so it sounds softer. The next one is the closer to the bridge, the more weight. And conversely, the further from the bridge, the less weight. The next one, the closer to the bridge, the slower the speed. And of course, all of these, the opposite is true for all of these rules. Next, the faster the bow speed, the higher the contact point. If you play close to the bridge with too fast a bow speed, it gets a scratchy, horrible sound. And the last one of these is the faster the bow speed, the less weight, and obviously vice versa. The student needs to experience all of these rules, and the best way is to experiment and figure it out by doing scales. And we'll talk more about the importance of working with the bow and doing scales when we do the session here in December coming up on scales and arpeggios. So these facts and principles must be conceptualized and understood by the mind and by the body prior to beginning foyer number 32, or learned in the first few variations. So I use the theme of foyers 32 to discuss some basic intonation issues. Starting first with checking first position, as we discussed in the last session, using a perfect fourth between the first finger and the string above, and a perfect octave between the fourth finger and the string below. And that sets the hand in first position. That's the basic first step for working on intonation, using the perfect intervals and knowing how to check with the open strings. This theme here is ideal for that because it's all in first position. So I ask the students to check first position every time they take their hand away from the cello. And by the time they finish all of these variations, they'll be quite secure with finding first position and sensitizing where the elbow and the arm should be. Next, I discuss Pablo Casal's concept of expressive intonation. In this case, raising the F sharp in measure 3 and having the B slightly higher as the leading tone in C major. In addition, I insist on the students having the left hand fingers round, the fingers down in a relaxed manner, and the thumb under the second finger, as we discussed last time. Since there's so many repetitions of the same notes, this is an ideal way to ingrain these good left hand habits. So here's an example of theme number 32. High F sharp, low F natural, high B, so the 5 pages of the Foyard variations cover all the basic issues for the right arm in an organized and sequential manner. But it's the teacher's responsibility to understand all the issues involved in each variation so that every aspect of bow technique is discussed and explored. Each variation involves a specific task that must be distilled and clarified. In the next part of today's session, I want to highlight some of the important pedagogical facets of a few of the variations from number 32 and talk briefly about some of the other pages. Although there is not enough time here to have a complete visit to all of the variations and all the successive pages, this will at least provide a sampling of how to use these variations. So each variation builds on the previous variations and adds one or more new concepts. So variation number 1 now requires us to play using the full bow, and it has lines to emphasize playing the notes long and connected. Some of the issues include using the full bow, and the tempo would be like something like 72 to the 8th note, not the quarter note. So it's really quite a slow tempo. If it's too fast, you can't get a good sound on the low strings using the full bow. So part of the learning process here is figuring out a good tempo for these variations. And then there will be left-right motion using the full bow, the bow parallel to the bridge, the block of sound being consistent, the contact point changing on the different strings in order to maintain the same sound. And this involves a few of the rules that we mentioned before. The higher the string, the lower the contact point, and also the shorter the string length, the lower the contact point, and so forth. And then the correct use of the arm and the elbow and a relaxed shoulder. So here's an example of variation number 1. Full bow. Eighth note, dot, 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 dot. Very high contact point here, and so forth. So you notice my contact point on the C string, obviously a lot higher than on the A string. And by the way, notice that I do use vibrato in working on these variations. The reason is so that the students work on the coordination issues between the left and right arms, because the motions are so different that they need to work on the different motions and get used to the continuous vibrato with all these variations. So variation 2 is for a staccato stroke, but still using the full bow. And so it can be produced in 2 different ways. The first way might be to use a small part of the bow at the frog and then move to the tip and use a small up bow with a low contact point at around, again, 84 to the 8th note, not very fast. So something like... and so forth. Or the second way might be keeping the bow on the string for the entire length of the bow and using a very high contact point. So that sort of thing, using the full bow. These two different ways of playing a short note produce very different sounds and might be used in different kinds of repertoire, Beethoven as opposed to Strauss or something, Mahler. So the next variation asks for playing legato with a core sound using the full bow and a low contact point. And now we're probably in the quarter note of 84, so it might be. Notice again the contact point changes as I go to the lower string then. So notice that my students write in the tempos there. It's a little bit hard to see here, but you'll be able to see it on the PowerPoint afterwards. They do this as part of their discovery process of figuring out what each variation needs, what's called experiential learning. I don't tell them the tempo beforehand, but we discuss it after I hear them play. And I always check to see if they've written in the tempo that they're thinking. If there are no tempos written in their practicing, I won't listen to the variation. It's part of the training for self-discipline and self-discovery. Notice also the arrows that are written in over the theme regarding intonation, the way I talked about Casals' expressive intonation concept. Actually, that's my writing on the top there where I wrote Pablo Casals and expressive intonation. The next variation, variation number 4, deals with bow distribution. So the definition of bow distribution is how much bow we use and which part of the bow. And I asked them to know this definition and to be able to repeat it like a little mantra again. Things to think about here include the correct parts of the arm, the lower part of the arm for the separate quarter notes in the first measure, and the upper part of the arm for the separate quarter notes in the second measure. Again, a little mantra from the last time. The upper part of the arm controls the lower part of the bow. The lower part of the arm controls the upper part of the bow. Also, this variation involves left-right motion, which we discussed last time, with relaxation of the arm and shoulder as one comes into the frog, and thinking about the elbow going in an arc. But in this case, we stay on the right side for the détaché at the frog and the left side for the détaché at the tip. So basically, we're starting to put together the information that was covered in the very first lesson: core sound, parts of the arm, left-right motion, elbow arc, etc., etc. So this one would be whole bow, half the bow, whole bow, half the bow, lower arm, upper arm, left-right motion, stay. So use the left-right motion to get to the tip, to get to the frog, but then you stay there. So variations 5 and 6, one might think that it could be either staccato or spiccato, but it really should be done with staccato since it says M for the middle of the bow. And it's more important for the students at this point in their tonal development to focus on figuring out how to get a good big sound in the middle of the bow. They need to think about playing in the middle of the bow with the lower arm and having the first finger kiss the stick onto the hairs and then releasing at about 58 to the quarter note. And staccato strokes require a low contact point for a good sound. So staccato. And I use this variation to talk about what I call catch and float, the two elements that are really important in staccato. Catching the string so that the beginning of the note is clear and floating the bow for the middle and the end of the note. This may be the first time that students really listen to their sound for the beginning, middle, and end of a particular note, and it helps them develop skills of listening to their own sound. So catch and float, catch, float. And so forth. So variation 7, this variation builds on the last two plus bow distribution again, and it's clear that it has to be a staccato stroke since one couldn't do spiccato at the tip. Another reason why the previous variation should be also done as staccato. And we'll deal with spiccato later on down the page. By the way, this is a good opportunity to make sure that the student knows what the abbreviation SP means and that it comes from the German word Spitze, since they'll sometimes see this in real music. This variation is another one in which the student needs to put the little rules that we discussed earlier into practice. The quarter note needs a high contact point closer to the fingerboard because it requires a fast bow speed to get to the tip. The mantra, the faster the bow speed, the higher the contact point. And then the staccato strokes need a lower contact point, as we discussed in the last variation. So this is a great example of how Fourier builds concepts in a logical and sequential fashion, layering new ideas on top of ideas that have been internalized. So full bow. Higher contact point, lower. High, low. So next variation, variation 8, is the first of many variations that deal with dotted rhythms. And the first thing that needs to be understood intellectually is that in dotted rhythms, we divide the pulse into 2s or 4s, but definitely not into 3s. In other words, in this case, we can think of 2 quarter notes or 4 eighth notes, but not triplets. And this may seem like a very obvious concept, but it's actually a revelation to many students. So you want to go 1, 2, 1, 2, or you want to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, but you don't want 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, which would make a triplet, obviously. So dotted rhythms are really difficult for string players to play. It seems to be much easier for pianists and wind players. And part of the reason has to do with being able to release the arm weight after the initial attack of the note. So once again, the catch and float concept. The next thing is to put this into practice by using the full bow, by dividing the bow into the 2 or 4 parts and stopping the bow before the eighth notes. Now, if the student listens carefully, they probably will hear that the short note sounds very short. So the next concept is that the short note, the eighth note, needs proportionally a little more bow in order to give it enough sound. And they may even want to put a little more stress on the short note. Finally, they need to do some sort of float on the long note, which helps release the sound and relax the arm. So we get... 1, 2, 1, 2. Later on in variations 18 to 21, we'll have more dotted rhythms. And by that time, the basic information that we just discussed will have been internalized. So variations number 9 through 11 all deal with various kinds of staccato issues. In number 10, one has to be careful with the rhythm. The first beat is a triplet, but notice that the second beat is actually a duple eighth note. So it's a little bit longer than the triplets, even though at first glance they look the same. So it would be still short with a rest, but just a little longer than those triplets. And this is a great opportunity to point out how we always need to be very clear thinking about how rhythm works. Finally, number 11, again, layers several concepts. A bow distribution problem, plus the staccato stroke, and the rhythm issue of the duple. But this variation has an interesting contact point issue also. At first, it may look a little bit like number 7 that we did with the quarter notes and the eighth notes. However, the contact point issue here is the opposite. It's a bit counterintuitive. Basically, the contact point needs to be quite low for both the staccato notes and the quarter notes. Because of the rule, the more notes in a bow, the lower the contact point. But when you experiment, it turns out that the quarter notes need to be lower in order to get a big core sound. So low, lower, higher. So the eighth notes, the triplet notes, need to be slightly higher than the quarter notes in that example. I sometimes tell the students that each of these variations are a little puzzle, and you need to figure out how to solve the puzzle. And taken that way, it becomes almost a challenge game to find out how each one of these variations work. So détaché is our most important bow stroke. It's our bread and butter stroke. Number 12 should be played in the middle of the bow with the lower arm. Some people call détaché a scrub stroke because of the action of the lower arm. This variation should first be played probably without the accents in order to make sure that the détaché is working well and that the sound production of this variation is pure and clean. So no accents. And then one might start to add the accents either with bow speed or with first finger to get slightly different kinds of sounds. So obviously, I don't have time to go through the whole thing on each of these, but you get the idea, I guess, of them. So variation 13 builds on number 12, but with bow distribution added in. It's important to build in the left-right motion in order to get a good sound at the tip. And the main focus should be on the contact point. So here we need a higher contact point for the détaché since it's a faster bow speed, and lower for the quarter notes since there are more notes in the bow. So low, so forth. Variation 14 presents another contact point puzzle with 3 different strokes: détaché, staccato, and full bow. The contact point should be higher for the quarter notes because we need a fast bow speed going all the way to the tip. So we get 3 different things. If they notice the mistakes that's here in this music here, I want them to notice that in this edition of the Foyer, it's missing the dots on some of the eighth notes in the first measure. You'll notice it. This is a good place to talk to the students about being aware of possible errors in the music, especially in international editions. They're famous for having mistakes on every page. We want to train the students to adhere to what is in the music, but they also have to have critical eyes and critical ears to pick up on mistakes. So I'm going to skip 15, 16, and 17 because of time. But by the way, I don't skip any of these in the lessons, and many of them require that the students bring them into 2 lessons or more in order to really absorb the different concepts. So variation 18 presents another more complicated dotted rhythm situation, building on number 8. I use this variation to discuss how we can find relaxation while playing the longer note. So I asked the students to play this slowly at first and actually say the word relax in the middle in a very rhythmical fashion. So relax, 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 relax. And one has to really try to release the muscles of the bow arm after the initial attack of the note. Saying the word relax can also be helpful in feeling the internal rhythm of the dotted rhythm. This variation is also a good place to discuss double dotting. And I usually talk to the students a little about the French Baroque style and ask them to listen to some Lully and Rameau and some Couperin to hear the double dotting, and then to try it a bit themselves. I like to show them how these exercises relate to real music, that they're not just dry exercises. So maybe... or with the double dotting. Variations 19 to 21 all build on the dotted rhythms we've just worked on. Number 21 is the hardest of the bunch. It really deals with coordination issues, and it has 4 different ways to produce the same sound, but they all have to sound the same. really dealing with contact point issues here and how the weight works on each one of those. I'm not going to go into the details now, but that's a really important thing to figure out. So variations, the next variations all deal with what we generally call up bow staccato, though it's also down bow staccato and sometimes called hooked staccato or slurred staccato. These three variations should be played really at the same tempo, so the student increases the ability to do the stroke faster. Because these are all staccato strokes, the contact point should be quite low. So 22. 23. And 24. I often tell the students that these are specialty strokes and not very important right now. But then I also say that they're actually very important right now, sort of emphasizing the irony of that. Then I ask them why these variations are so important, to see if they really understand the two main issues here. The equal amount of bow for all of the notes, dividing the bow equally, and the ability to keep the same focused sound throughout the bow so they're capable of playing with that sound anywhere on the bow. And I usually ask them to listen to the Heifetz Horo staccato to hear the potential for playing this stroke in a virtuosic way. With variations 25 and 26, we begin a discussion about the off-the-string strokes such as spiccato and sautelier. Those of you who attended Selma and Josh's wonderful series on Sevchik may remember that I briefly mentioned something about how I go about teaching these strokes. So basically, I don't really talk about sautelier in the beginning, but my students do it every week without even knowing that they're working towards a good spiccato and sautelier. We do it with their scale system. When they're doing their 2-octave Fourier scales, we do duples, triplets, and 16th notes from the very first lesson. So duples, triplets, 16th, at the same pulse, obviously, and through the whole scale. And I may talk briefly about the upper arm being active and the wrist being passive, and I make sure that they're in the right place for the bow to come off the string. Then after a few weeks we add sextuplets and octuplets at a relatively slow tempo, but then work it up to about 65 or so to the pulse. So sextuplets and octuplets. And by the time the students get to number 25 and 26 here, they already have a nascent sautelier. And then we delve in further about how it really works and how to be relaxed, etc. I don't have time here today in this session to demonstrate the whole process, but if you're interested in my sequential approach to teaching and learning sautelier, I invite you to watch the video that I prepared. The link, I don't know if it's in the chat already now, but we'll send it around after this session, and we'll also send around the PowerPoint itself. So this video that I created is from a series of blogs that I made for Cello Bello about 8 years ago called The Joy of Fourier, in which I taped live lessons with students showing how I teach all the Fourier bowing exercises, all the ones that we're going through, all of these different variations and themes. In the video in our chat, I put snippets of the lessons with my student Caroline, showing the teaching of spiccato and sautelier over a period of several weeks, demonstrating various exercises and showing her progress. At the end of the video, there's also a short snippet of Caroline's recital performance of the second movement of the Elgar Concerto, featuring the famous sautelier stroke at the tempo of about 80 to the half note, which she did as part of a 9th grade recital that she had done. So by the time they finish number 25 and 26, students should have a good basic understanding of the sautelier stroke, which will be further refined several months later in the variations of theme number 33 and again in variations of theme number 36. The time in between these different pages of the Fourier is very useful for the students to relax and get comfortable with the sautelier stroke. One can't push it or force the learning. It just has to gradually become part and parcel of our playing technique, and part and parcel before they start working on the Elgar second movement. So here is 25, for example. And 26. And so forth. So in the next variation, variation 27, I actually make a change in the text and I ask the students to use the full bow rather than just at the frog, the way it's indicated originally, at about quarter note equals 44. So I want to see whether they have absorbed playing with the bow parallel to the bridge at a relatively fast bow speed and with a fast left-right motion. If the bow is not perfectly perpendicular, then it's going to skim up and down the string. So this is a kind of a test regarding the bow being parallel to the bridge. And so forth. But the main reason for using the whole bow is to introduce the important concept of ballistic motions. So this is another kind of use of balance in our playing. We use ballistics in our vibrato, and sometimes we use it in the shifts. We use it in a lot of things. A ballistic motion is a rapid burst of motion, which then has an equal movement in the opposite direction. In other words, if we can push the arm away from the body and we can use muscles to pull it back, so we can go dot, dot, or we can throw the arm, bump, and let it bounce back by itself. But in order to do that, the muscles in the arm have to be very relaxed. You can try that for yourself. You can go dot, dot, or you can go dot and let it bounce back. It's much more efficient to let the hand bounce back by itself. It's kind of like using a boomerang effect to come back to the frog. And this saves energy and is a more efficient use of the arm. So this one would be... So I'm not pulling it back, I'm using ballistics. And the same is true, by the way, in vibrato, in which we don't have to vibrate up and down, but we go up, and if you relax, it'll bounce back. The hand will just bounce back, and you get the opposite effect then, the opposite motion. So the last three variations on this page all build on the idea of ballistics. And they also work on the interaction between the upper arm, which is active, and the wrist, which is passive. And I would suggest doing these at about 100 to the quarter note, and make sure you start the stroke from the string, especially the up bow ones, number 29 and 30. So 28 would be, again, ballistic to let it come back. Making sure you're on the string for those up bows, and then etc. Once the students have completed big number 32, the first page here in the foyer, they're ready to reinforce the basic bow concepts with big number 33, the next page. So instead of being in just first position, this scalar theme goes to fourth position as well. And so issues of contact point really become paramount. Also, because there's so many notes in one bow, the students get their first taste of sans filet or spun sound. That means generally a much lower contact point. Again, this is a great example of foyer moving forward sequentially, adding some additional challenges without being excessive. I'll demonstrate the theme of with variation number 1 using a low contact point because there's so many notes in one bow for a core sound with sans filet. And you notice how close to the bridge I am. I'm not going to play the whole thing because of time, but that would be about the tempo that I would use and figuring out how the contact point really works. So the main concepts on that page: contact point issues, sans filet, left-right motion, bow distribution, and dotted rhythms like sautelier and up bow staccato at faster tempos on this whole page. And then there are a couple of other new issues that haven't been addressed before. So number 12, for example, could be interpreted two ways: as an up bow staccato or as a flying spiccato. And it's good to do both. So number 12 would be staccato, or flying. hardest ones on this page are number 21 and 22, which involve some coordination issues. And recognizing that the pattern here is with 3 notes grouped together rather than 2 or 4 notes in the rest of the page. So, for example, 21. And this is, by the way, good practice for the Paganini-Moses variations, the last variation. Which is exactly, that's actually the bowing of number 22, the opposite direction, with the single bow and the up bow. So along the way here, I also usually sprinkle in some other bow exercises, including this one, a bow coordination exercise, which could be done with open strings, but it's also great to do with scales or the theme of 33. So I'll just play open string for now. Frog. I'll play a scale. Frog and tip. Or frog and tip down down. Making sure the bow is on the string at the tip there, or up down, on, using left right motion to get the coordination, and up up. And there's also a wonderful tortillé bow speed exercise, which I really like a lot. This is a scale counting the numbers that you see there, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, as you do the scale. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Working with bow speed, obviously all that for that entire exercise. The next 3 pages of Foyer themes and variations all deal with one of the most important issues of bow technique, string crossings. And figuring out how to do good string crossings can be life-changing for a cellist. Big number 34 deals with 2 strings. Big number 35 deals with 3 strings, and number 36 with 4 strings. But the basic technique of string crossings is presented in number 34. String crossings involve some of the most complicated motions in string playing, and as such, they're the hallmarks that separate a beginning, an intermediate, and an advanced player. A beginner often lacks fluidity and has a stiff right arm when attempting string crossings. An intermediate player will have a basic understanding of the mechanics and will make more rounded motions. But advanced players, I often compare to break dancers. It's as though they have no bones in their arms or legs, and everything works smoothly. The first thing to understand is how the arms actually work, the physiology and the kinesiology of the right arm. So we can identify as cellists 4 parts of the arm: the upper arm, the lower arm, the wrist, and the fingers. Each part of the arm is attached to the next part of the arm with a joint, and each works differently. So the upper part of the arm here is connected with a ball and socket joint to the shoulder, and this joint allows for movements in all directions. The lower part of the arm is connected to the upper arm with by the elbow, and that's a hinge joint. And for cellists, that joint allows only movement in a horizontal direction. The wrist is connected to the lower arm with an articulated joint, which allows for movement in all directions. And finally, the fingers have 3 hinge joints, which can move vertically for cellists. The fingers can move slightly from side to side because the joint of the proximal phalanx, the part that's connected to the palm of the hand, is rather loose. So this looseness enables extensions in the left hand. That's why we can do extensions. But for the right hand, the important movement is up and down, even in a collé stroke, which we won't be getting into today. But even for that, it's basically the same kind of a motion. Playing the cello involves movements of the arm on two planes, the horizontal and the vertical planes. So moving the arm horizontally results in our various strokes, the détaché, the legato, the mortelé, etc. Even the off-the-string strokes, such as spiccato and sautilé, are produced by mostly horizontal motions of the arm, but the bow responds by bouncing because of the flexibility of the stick. So moving the arm vertically results in string crossings. As a result of these various joints and the different ways that the arm moves, there are three parts of the arm that can produce horizontal motions, the basic strokes, and three parts of the arm that can be used for string crossings. So the three parts of the arm that move horizontally are the upper arm, the lower arm, and the wrist. The fingers can't move horizontally because of the hinge joints. The three parts of the arm that are used for string crossings are the upper arm, the wrist, and the fingers. And it's important to note that the lower arm cannot move vertically. Misusing this part of the arm is one of the major causes of tendinitis in cello players. Many cellists try to play string crossings by moving the lower arm up and down, which can cause inflammation, pain, and potentially serious injury. I spend a lot of time in lessons helping the students to learn how to use the arm in the most efficient, effective, and kinesthetically correct manner to prevent injury. Forcing joints to work in the wrong way will cause wear and tear and painful problems with the elbow. So all the string crossings, even the most complicated, boil down to four basic shapes: the arc, the circle, the figure eight, and the wave. I call these bowing figures, and I introduce the students to these basic shapes by asking them to play open strings and imagine holding a pencil in their bow hand. So they're holding their bow, and here's the pencil, and there might be a piece of paper over here. If the student can't imagine the shapes that they're producing, then I hold that paper while they're playing the open strings, and the patterns emerge and are very clear as they're bowing and doing the shapes on the paper. So the four basic shapes are the arc, that sort of shape, an arc, and there are several different arcs that you can do. You can see the examples there. The circle, the figure eight, and the wave. After we work with these bowing figures, I usually ask the students what these four bowing figures have in common. I'm interested in seeing if they realize that they're all rounded figures. Sometimes people see squares and rectangles at first rather than circles and arcs. Understanding that these bowing figures are smooth, rounded figures is really important part of understanding how string crossings work. As I pointed out in an earlier session, a lot of cello-related things work in curves. Smooth string crossings are one of the most difficult things to achieve well. Young players will often sound very angular in their playing because they haven't figured out how to move the arm gracefully and in arcs. So you'll get this kind of jerky kind of motion in young players. It's easy for string players to play legato on one string, but playing legato across strings is difficult. I often point out how pianists play legato. The piano is a percussive instrument, and when they depress a key, it makes a hammer hit a string. So every note sounds ping, ping, ping. The way they play legato, besides using a pedal, of course, is slightly overlapping the notes. By doing that, they get the effect of a legato. It's an aural illusion. For us, the same thing is true in our string crossings. In order to achieve a legato string crossing, we need to almost play a little double stop. So just slightly overlapping a little bit. Next, we apply this information to the variations in number 34. For example, variation 1 is a figure 8. Variation 2 is an arc. Arc going like that. Variation 3 is a wave. In this case, I'm using my upper arm, but I could use the wrist if it were faster. And then the last one is the circle. The repeated notes don't count in this because they're not string crossing, so it's, and that makes a circle. All of our most complicated string crossing passages in music boil down to these basic bowing figures, and of course, an infinite number of combinations of these bowing figures. One other important principle, the last thing I'll mention, is that if there is a horizontal movement and a vertical movement, they should never be done with the same part of the arm. That would make for a very confusing situation for your body. For example, if you have a détaché stroke, which is a horizontal movement, and a string crossing, which is a vertical movement, they need to probably be with two different parts of the arm. So if you're going détaché, string crossing, you might choose to do the détaché with the forearm and the string crossing with the upper arm, or you could use the wrist for the horizontal stroke and the upper arm for the string crossing. You have several possibilities. But you don't want to use the wrist for both the horizontal and the vertical motions at the same time. That would be confusing for the brain and the body. For example, in the last movement of the Saint-Saëns concerto, we have a situation requiring a sautelier and a string crossings. We'd probably choose to do the sautelier with the wrist and the string crossing with the upper arm. So you do the sautelier with the wrist and the string crossing with the upper arm. If I had more time, I'd love to give some examples from the cello repertoire of all the complicated combinations of arcs and waves and figure eights and circles that we use in playing in our repertoire, but I'm afraid we are running out of time. If you're interested, you can take a look at my 1995 article in the Asta Journal, which we'll put in the chat box or send it to you afterwards, or look at the Joy of Foyar blog on my website. The next session in the series will focus on a sequential approach to learning and teaching scales and arpeggios. I'm sorry I talked so long today, but obviously bow technique is a huge topic. So if there are any questions or comments, I'm happy to stay on to talk, and you can always email me if you like. Thanks so much for listening.
Jeff has his hand up.
Now that first, Bob, spectacular presentation.
Thanks, Jeff.
Truly spectacular.
Really?
Is it possible, now that you got rid of your sharing, to go back to your diagrams that showed the pattern of the circle and the figure eight?
Jeff, sorry, I can't. The technology is beyond me.
Okay, well, the thing,
but we'll send around the PowerPoint. Oh, did I lose something here? What happened there? Am I still here?
Yes, you are.
Okay. We'll send around the PowerPoint, and you can look at it again.
Yeah, no, it wasn't a point so much that I wanted to look at it, but there was an aspect of it that I think is you might call a refined detail, but I think is a really important point,
right?
Which is the circle and the figure eight are not symmetrical at each end. When you're at the frog, it's way smaller. And I tend to describe to students, for instance, instead of a circle, it's more like a wedge coming to a point, because I don't want to come into the frog and do a big drop because I lose power.
Yeah, the thing is, it's depends on which strings you're doing the circle on. Let's say, so if you do it from the C string to the A string, it's obviously a much rounder.
Yes, of course, that's way bigger. But
right.
What you were demonstrating was on adjacent strings, and the A and D string particularly, so that when you're at the frog and doing it, the loop is a lot more compressed vertically. It's not the same amount as you go out.
So the reason I like the idea of thinking it in terms of these general figures, arc and circle and so forth, is because of the roundness of it, and because that's what's so hard for people at first to learn how to do.
No,
Obviously,
I really understand that, but I think
yeah.
it can be helpful to make the observation that it's not completely symmetrical in the motion.
Okay.
Well, could I say one thing, that the longer the lever, the bigger the arc. The shorter the lever, if there's just a tiny bit of space towards the frog, then it's going to be very small. So the lever is quite long when you go out to the tip, and the curve is big.
An
Okay.
excellent
Good
explanation and point. So
yeah, thanks. That's what's so wonderful, is that we're all looking at the similar kind of thing, same kind of thing, and have slightly different ways of describing. It's like looking at a statue and turning it slightly differently, and you see it in a different way, and they're all valid.
I'd like to say something about the anatomy of the hand. is that people think that the joint is here, but it's actually deep inside the hand here. So when you move your hand, your finger is quite long. It's that long rather than at the knuckle.
Oh, okay. And
Yeah,
especially that's hard for people to see with the thumb because you look at the thumb, and I ask people sometimes how many joints are there, and they'll say two
yeah,
because they see the knuckle and the first flange, and then they don't realize that there's one all the way back there that's hidden.
yeah. There's the one at the wrist. The thumb is the longest joint because it can touch every finger. It's the only finger that can really do that easily and quickly.
Yeah. I don't know
It's
if I mentioned, did I mention the last time? I can't remember if I said this here or someplace else, but there, it turns out there are more nerve connections. Did I mention that? There are more nerve connections between the thumb and the brain than any other part of the arm, any part of of the body, except for the tongue. The
and the
tongue and the thumb.
erogenous zones.
No, no, I wasn't going there. But because of those two things, man is the speech making, speech using animal, and man is
Yeah.
the tool using animal, right?
Selma, that's a point that you can't make in a lesson or you might lose your job.
Yeah, yeah. Well, when I ask that question in a group, I say, don't go there. you know.
Just trying to be accurate.
Yeah.
May I ask a question about the position of the pinky in and the role of that in sound production?
Oh, that's a great question. How many hours do we have now? Um, well, this is a place where people have slightly different opinions about how the little finger works. I see it very much as a balance finger, and so these exercises that people do, I think are very valid for figuring out how to balance here, and is very useful for spiccato and sauterelle kind of strokes because again of the balance thing. And so I teach it. Yeah, I teach it down here. I don't know if you can see down here. But I also teach it up here, and especially for all the string crossings when they're figuring out string crossings, going from one string to another. I use that in that way, or also again as sauterelle and so forth. And so I'm very much into this. And it's a training thing. At first, the students, they don't recognize that they can even do that, and then they have to train so that there's a little muscle here, so the little finger goes close to the third finger, so it works in tandem there. But I know that many cellists don't particularly like the idea of on the top. I got that. I feel I totally I did that, and my teacher in Freiburg did it, and actually Paul Katz I think does that also.
Is there a role in the pinky in some way helping pronate the hand?
Well, yes and no. I mean, we don't really want to pronate as such. Maybe as you go to the tip, yeah, you do pronate a little bit, and so there's this kind of again balancing kind of thing. But I don't necessarily. I mean, I think that just sort of works with where you put your hand, how far out your hand is, how
There's a
much you want
neutral
to
thing.
pronate. But at the frog, you don't want to pronate.
No, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll jump in and say that I find it very helpful to have kids put their pinky on the bow stick if they're overly supinated with their hand leaning out.
Yes.
It's a good corrective thing to do for a while.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, and Good. I was wondering, do you start 32 like at beginner stage, or at what point do you introduce it?
Yeah, so that's a great question. These sessions I'm talking about an intermediate student. So somebody who's already studied the cello up to a certain point, can play in fourth position, is willing to put in the time to practice and so forth, because that's what I sort of expect before. But it's not a beginning student. This is an intermediate student. But an intermediate could be a college student who is playing already pretty advanced literature, but needs to go back and revisit things. So it's at the point where they've already had the concept, the basic concept, sort of there, but not really crystallized and clarified.
Yeah, good. And do you go through all of 32 before going to 33?
I'm very systematic.
Yeah,
I,
okay. Right.
yeah, as long as it may take, for most students, it's a year and a half to two, depending on how fast they can get through each one. But I don't let them move on unless they understand the concept and are really doing it well. And it's just a matter of sort of training that discipline. And once they understand what they have to do, I try to get them to get through about 5 of these variations a week, per lesson. They'll
Mhm.
practice maybe 10 of them, but I try to get through and finish 5. And, many times you can only get through 2 or 3, and then they have to do those other ones again. But I'm very systematic, and and they understand it's going to go as fast as long as sometimes it takes 2.5 years to get through everything. But whatever it is, it is.
An elucidation of, or an extension of that question of when you say how much time it takes, do you divide up your lesson into slots? And so this, I'm going to spend this much time talking about this yard thing. If we don't get through it, we move on to the next thing.
Yeah, I generally do what I think I talked about last time. Dividing it into 5 parts of the lesson. So the warm ups, the exercises. This would be part of the exercises, the scales and arpeggios, etudes, and pieces. And if I look at the clock, and I definitely am looking at the clock again during the lesson, if it's taking too long to get through any of those things, I say sorry. You need to practice this more and get back to me next week on it. But you need to move on.
And do you ever take some of these 32 variations and you have people like do them with a scale? I could see some of them it would be, very useful to do that, especially if somebody and I guess a related question is, do you ever have students get tired of, yeah, duh, well, I'm not in singing voice, but playing this same tune every practice session for
I haven't, I haven't. The funny thing is, I haven't. First of all, I have not had any students complain about doing this at all.
okay.
And the funny thing is, for me as a teacher, I'm doing this every day, with a bunch of students for years. I've been doing it, and I somehow never get bored with it. It's like, it's so interesting to me. Not only the technique that they're training, but it's also so interesting to me to get inside the student's head and figure out, okay, why are they not understanding this? How can I explain this better? And I literally never get bored with it. By the way, you can do the same thing, number 32, say, in thumb position. So if you have a advanced student who's still really working, knows how to play in thumb position, but is just working on this, you can do the variations up there, and that all works very well. And as far as the rhythms and things, I don't actually use it for the scales. I think it's a great idea. When I'm doing scales, I have a whole other set of rhythm kinds of things that
Right.
I do.
Okay.
I think I mentioned Margaret Pardy's variations are really terrific, and a whole bunch of other ones that I like to use.
Great. And I have one last question, and you may have addressed this, and I was processing so much. On just on one string, doing, full length of the bow, how do you describe the shape that the arm travels? Is it a circle or figure eight or
Arc.
just on one string?
Arc. The elbow is going for me in an arc. So obviously there's a lot going on because of getting the bow parallel to the bridge and all that. But as far as that kind of basic movement as you go out to the tip, that's the arc of the elbow. And then there's also the side of the string issue. So you can go on the down bow on this side and on the up bow on that side. So there's a little bit of a circle going on potentially there. I don't usually use that right away, but I use it pretty quickly. And after a couple of lessons of talking about how do you get what I call a three-dimensional sound. So using that motion, I think we might have mentioned it last time. I can't remember now. Like the way they did vibrato in the Baroque period, in part, what they call tremblement is really this kind of thing. And for bow changes, it's good to go on the different sides of the string. Down bow on the upper string side, and up bow on the lower. So there are lots. Again, there are just lots and lots of circles and arcs and various things in even just one
Right.
string. Yeah,
Thank
great
you.
question. Yeah.
Are there any
So-
other questions? Great.
So I do want to just mention that in the upcoming, the penultimate session, one of the ones in January, is going to be a session on repertoire for the intermediate student. And again, I invite you all to send me examples of repertoire that's not the standard repertoire, things that you may have found that are, around the edges a little bit, but are interesting for an intermediate student. So we don't always just do, especially just do the Suzuki kind of repertoire, but also the things that are in the RCM syllabus and the British syllabus lists, but that we find some things that are a little bit different, I think is interesting and worth doing.
Well, thank you so much. That was a splendid, splendid presentation. So clear and so well developed.
Hope I
And
didn't talk too fast.
I've actually I have the Fayard book and I've worked it very thoroughly, except for those bits, because I had a teacher who used other material and but it's all covered. I mean, I know it, but I love the way it's organized for beginners and it's simplified and then it expands so that the more you build on the beginning bits, you can advance your bow technique in that way. It's
Yeah,
brilliant. Absolutely
yeah,
wonderful. I'm going to take a look at it.
great, great.
So,
I have a convert then. That's great.
yes, you absolutely do,
Okay,
for sure. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the 14th of December for the next installment.
great. Thanks
Good
so much,
evening.
Reen. Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Eric.
Bye.
Bravo,
Bye.
bravo, Bob. Great.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.